All right, I think we're ready to start. Welcome if you've just joined. The session is recording just so that we've got a record of it and people can re-watch it who weren't able to join this afternoon. So best to keep cameras and microphones off. Right, so this is, as billed there, a refresher really for designated teachers around Pupil Premium Plus for looked after children. And we have just refreshed and updated our Pupil Premium policy, and that will be going on our website very shortly. But I can just walk you through some of the kind of updates and changes. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So in terms of what we're trying to achieve with Pupil Premium Plus, I always like to come back to a Stephen Hawking quote, because we will probably get bogged down into the detail of and the nuts and bolts of what it's used for and the arrangements and so forth. But it is there to make a difference for our looked after children, but all our vulnerable children actually. And I do like this quote, which kind of reminds us of that fact. So he says, remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Try and make a sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious. And however difficult life may seem, there's always something you can do and succeed at. It matters that you don't just give up. And I think that's what, in a small way, Pupil Premium does allow us to do, is to for children to have those kind of big dreams and aspirations. So it's important to just kind of keep that in the back of our minds. Thanks, George. Can you give me the next slide, please? So our aims today are, as I said, to give you a quick refresher around Pupil Premium Plus for Surrey's looked after children. As you will know, Pupil Premium arrangements do vary slightly from local authority to local authority. But what I would say on that is if you have multiple children from multiple local authorities in your school, then you can use us in the Surrey Virtual School to kind of link in with other virtual schools and kind of put you in touch with the right person if that's helpful. So what we're going to do is highlight a few updates to the policy, because new financial year means new conditions of grant and guidance from the DFE. So it's important to just have a look to see what changes there are, and just reflect really on implications for practice and how we might get the most out of Pupil Premium Plus for our looked after learners. And then finally, answer any nuts and bolts questions you may have about arrangements or something that you really need to know. And as I've said before, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll attempt to kind of keep an eye on that. You do also have the hand up function as well, which you can use. Anything else, or we'll be around for a short time at the end as well if you want to put your questions to us individually. So I hope that was what you were expecting by booking on this afternoon. So is there anything else that anybody was expecting? Is that all okay? You don't have to say yes, you just have to, I'll take the silence as this is what you were expecting. Yeah, okay then, lovely. Let's proceed with the session then. George, can I have the next slide, please? Right, apologies if the slide is slightly small, but these are the key principles. We'll be sending you all of these slides and the updated policy to you by email afterwards. So as I've mentioned, all Pupil Premium Plus is used in line with the conditions of grant for that current financial year, and there are some new ones out hot off the press, and I've put the links to them in there as well. This year there seems to be a bit more guidance than there normally is, so there's a couple of kind of key documents. There's an overview document as well as the more traditional conditions of grant, which we're very used to. All of the different kinds of Pupil Premium, including Pupil Premium Plus for looked after children, has the same aim, which is to raise attainment of disadvantaged pupils of all abilities, and that's kind of lifted from the guidance. So the arrangements, as you I'm sure be aware, for Pupil Premium Plus for looked after children is that works slightly differently in that it's managed by the virtual school head for the purpose of supporting educational achievement of children in the care of the local authority. So that's slightly different from the other kinds of pupil premium, which goes directly to schools. And the role of the DT is really, really important in that, and it's a partnership between the virtual school and schools and their designated teachers. And it's thinking about the specific needs of looked after children, making sure they're understood, and how pupil premium can be used to support those needs. And particularly, it's kind of outlined in the statutory guidance for DTs. The page reference is page 21 in case you want to go and have a look at that. And importantly, like all kinds of pupil premium, but for Pupil Premium Plus in particular, DTs have a particular role around showing the impact that Pupil Premium Plus has in supporting educational outcomes of this group of children. Thanks. George, can you go on to the next slide, please? Right, just a bit of a kind of refresh really and remind of a few key things around our Surrey arrangements. You can, the way that we arrange things in Surrey Virtual School is that you make the request, as you'll know, through children's personal education plans, including those who have EHCPs, because previously, in a previous incarnation of our policy, that wasn't the case. So just want to kind of repeat that. The only exception is independent specialist settings, where we would expect that needs are already met through the funding provided by the LA to the school, but that would be the only exception. And we'll always be happy to have a conversation about that. The Pupil Premium and on the PEP would need to clarify how the funding is going to help to meet identified needs which are not already funded from another source, particularly from an EHCP. So those two plans, if they are in place for a looked after child, need to work in tandem really. So you can request funding for year R, including those who are not yet 5, to year 11. So that's important to kind of remember. At the moment, it's not possible to request Pupil Premium Plus for post-16, so I'm not sure if there are any post-16 colleagues on the call. However, this is something that that virtual schools across the country have been lobbying for a very long time at the DFE, and there might be a change in that coming soon. So I can't say it is definitely, but there's certainly been some strong negotiations there. So the other thing is there's 3 PEPs a year for looked after children. That's how we run things in Surrey, and at each PEP we would encourage you to think how Pupil Premium could be used to support progress. So it's always going to be there available, and that we have that evidence at each PEP about how that funding has been spent. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Right, so when I mentioned the nuts and bolts, this is all the information that I was meaning really. So what are the actual arrangements? So for the summer and the autumn terms this year, in the normal way, as we've always had, you can request up to £600 via your child's PEP, and that's allocated subject to a good quality PEP. And in terms of quality assurance, we have a simple quality assurance process. It's got 5 criteria, and all of those are in our Pupil Premium and PEP guidance. And I will make sure that's emailed to you with the kind of bundle of information at the end of the session, and if you need to revisit that you can, but it's a fairly simple kind of system. What we had in 2020 was a survey of designated teachers, and we had quite a lot of feedback around a whole variety of issues around pupil premium, but particularly the timings and the fact that sometimes it was difficult to plan because you request it at the beginning and you might get the decision at the end of the term around that funding being allocated. So for that reason, and for planning and for making things a bit simpler, and also to increase the likelihood that every looked after child will have pupil premium allocated to them, although you can request it, not all schools do. So to increase that kind of allocation to schools, what we have done for a couple of times now, we're going to be doing it again next spring term, is to allocate the £600 per child to meet their needs. So you will not need to request that £600, and that will replace the usual request that you would normally make via the PEP. The requirements are the same, though, that we still need to see, how that money was spent, because we are accountable for that spend and impact. And there's a few kind of provisos on that. As with everything else, subject to a good quality PEP in the autumn term, and then where that's not the case, we obviously provide feedback to individual around each individual PEP and the targets and the quality. But if that's not the case, then that will be allocated subject to kind of requests via the PEP. So that's the system that we are going to be operating, and for this term, next and the spring, so looking at a kind of whole financial year. And at the bottom of that note, it does say it's not possible for local authorities, unlike schools, to carry pupil premium forward. So it's a new allocation each financial year, so that's a slight change from the way that the schools are. But those are the nuts and bolts arrangements, so I hope that makes sense to you and it's what you were expecting to see. Could I have the next slide, please? Right, so in kind of line with DFE guidance, we would expect to see that barriers to engagement, learning, progress and attainment have been analysed and identified. That kind of analysis of needs is really, really important. And then that links with the spend, the pupil premium spend and target. So it's all a kind of a streamlined process in the PEP. So what we do recognise, though, is that our looked after children present with many different needs, and there are many different challenges that they may face, and which may get in the way of achieving good progress and educational outcomes. So what we undertake to do is to look at this really flexibly and consider all requests that are made, even if they may appear at first sight to be a little bit left field or a little bit unusual. We will have a look at them. I think the key thing is that they really linked to the child's identified needs, and the fact that you can show that those needs present a barrier to a child's learning. So that's kind of the way that we would look at it. And also, in responding to our any requests that we have via the PEP for Pupil Premium Plus, we would be considering whether what's being asked for replaces or duplicates something that an existing school budget might be funding, or other sources might be funding, for example, through a child's EHCP, or also what might be reasonably covered in fostering, or another allowance in place to support a child's needs while they're in care. So all of those kind of individual questions are, we've tried to kind of summarise them in the frequently asked questions section of the policy. We do get asked a lot of questions and we do respond to those, but we've also tried to kind of update the frequently asked questions section as well. Okay, can I have the next slide, please, George? We'd also this year have a couple of additional short-term grants, which you'll be probably aware of. So we've had the recovery premium, which runs for the academic year, and we've had schools-led tutoring grants. So in the policy, we have some appendices just giving some outline information and guidance and the links to the DfE documents around those. They are both short-term and separate grants to the main pupil premium grant. So I think hence the additional guidance that we've had this year, and the DfE kind of regulations and guidance that's come out is a bit more substantial than it usually is. But what we're talking about today specifically relates to Pupil Premium Plus. I'll just make the point that I don't know if people just joined. You may wish to switch your cameras off because we are recording the session. You might be more comfortable with that. It's up to you. Here we are. OK, thank you. Right, can you go to the next slide, please, George? Right, so I've presented quite a lot of information there. I've tried to kind of give you the main headlines, the nuts and bolts of what you need to know and so forth. Are there any questions or comments at this point? I'll just check the chat as well to see if anybody's put anything in there. I'm quite happy though if you just wish to listen and kind of absorb what you're hearing. And as I say, everything will be sent to you at the end of the session as well. OK, I'm not able to see anybody's hand up, or I'll just check the chat. No. OK, we will press on in that case. You might just want to put your microphones off as well, just because the session's been recorded. Right, so a couple of words about targets. We mentioned a little bit about those as well, and linking those to children's identified needs. What we know now is obviously the pandemic has had an enduring impact, and we're just learning more about what that may mean at the moment, aren't we? I mean, it's unfolding as we speak, and there's all the additional grants as I've just mentioned to kind of support children's learning and quote unquote recovery as well from some of the impacts. So we would, because the aim of Pupil Premium Plus, like all Pupil Premium, is to improve educational outcomes, we do want to very much see an academic learning target or a learning target in children's PEPs. And you may be aware that in January we had a local authority Ofsted for children's services in Surrey, which was the virtual school was very much part of that, as they always are. And the schools HMI who spoke to us had a look at many examples of children's PEPs, and did make one comment actually about a PEP where he didn't see any evidence of a learning target. It was more around the social emotional kind of side of things that I think what the PEP didn't do, it didn't make the link with the learning. So that was the bit that was missing, and that was the conversation. But it was interesting just to kind of think of the targets and remember the purpose of Pupil Premium Plus, like other kinds of premium, is to improve outcomes, educational outcomes. So we would want to see an academic or a learning target in there. However, in addition to that, there are all kinds of other areas that you'll be thinking about in terms of really appropriate targets for looked after learners. And what we do know is that there will be many non-academic challenges that children are facing, which pose a barrier to their learning. So I think it's making that clear in the PEP really. So some of those things might include a focus, or you might have targets that are focusing on transition and stabilisation, particularly for those children who are new to care. Everything is different, everything is new, there are many changes, and that might be where you would want to focus one of the targets. I've already mentioned children's emotional health, wellbeing and resilience. And in our PEP, you will see a box to record an Sdq score, so Strength and Difficulties Questionnaire score, and that may mean a lot to you or not very much. It will vary quite a lot. So the Sdq score, or it is used. It's a social care used extensively actually by social care for all looked after children. So you can benchmark it nationally. It's not going to tell you everything, but we know that for children with an elevated score, that will indicate the prevalence of significant social, emotional, mental health needs. So it's interesting to think about that score and what that may mean. And we're going to provide some additional training on that through the year. So we've got it in the PEP, but I'm aware that we haven't done specific training on that, although you may have got it from another source. Barriers to attendance might be an area for targets, and particularly in reducing levels of persistent absence. Although I have to say that on the whole, when we look at our attendance for our looked after learners, our Surrey looked after learners, it is actually really good, and a lot of children are attending school really consistently well, above 95%. So, but we know that, you know, individual children will struggle with that in some cases. And I can see there's a hand up actually. Right. I can't see. Oh, it's Michelle. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Anwin. You were just talking about Sdq scores, and I just wanted to share something that I find quite useful when I'm working with them, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Just that I always kind of remembered that if the score's up to 12, then they're deemed normal, and that's not a phrase that it's the phrase that comes with the kit itself, as you probably know, in the assessment. But where the score is between 12 and sort of 17, it indicates the emotional health needs, and I always think that's really useful as to pick up on whether we might have an intervention around ELSA, for example, or targets around that. And where it's over 17, we know that that's indicating more of a mental health need, and I think the score from 17 goes up to something like 40, so there's quite a big scale there. And of course the nearer to 40 is maybe a CAMS referral or something. But as a designated teacher, when we see those scores, it can just be quite helpful to know that if it's between 12 and 17, that's an emotional health need, and what might my PEP target look like, and if it's above their mental health. I just wanted to share.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful, actually. Yes, I think there's a lot more. There's probably variable knowledge around Sdq scores, and is something that we will be providing a lot more training around. But that was a really helpful summary of the scores. Thank you, Michelle. That's really helpful. So yes, that in that respect, that might drive or hopefully would drive a target around emotional health and well-being. Other areas there you might want to consider: peer and adult relationships, reconnecting with extracurricular activities with all the kind of relational benefits that they bring to the young person. Access to technology and educational materials and resources is something that is in the guidance as an example. And one of the things that's come from our young people, and is a bit of a recurring theme really, is preparation for independence, because what we know that our care experienced young people take on significant responsibilities when they're care leavers at a much younger age than the majority of the population. So, you know, reflecting back, sometimes you do get some comments around, I wish we'd had a bit more focus on preparing for independence, financial awareness, and those kind of things. So that's something to consider as well, I think, when we're thinking about targets. So to sum up on that slide, really, in addition to an academic learning target in line with the all of the guidance and the intention of Pupil Premium Plus, there might be so many other areas where you might want to focus attention in terms of the targets. Right, let me go forward, please, George. So I think it's quite helpful to have a look at targets, and it's really difficult to do this in a kind of Teams context, but all of these examples are in the Pupil Premium policy that we have and the guidance document, and it's really kind of focusing on what are the identified needs of the individual young person, and also how we might identify those individual needs. And we're doing some work on that. We have been doing some work on that through last year, and we will be doing some work, some subsequent work as well. So some of the ways and the tools that you might use to identify individual learning and other needs are listed there, and there's a couple of links. And you just saw a glimpse of Michelle there, who's actually joined the virtual school from Hampshire Local Authority and Virtual School, and is bringing with her all the know-how around one of the needs analysis tools there, which is the Hampshire PEP Toolkit, which is a really accessible resource to use to help identify needs more accurately. So the next few slides, I'm just going to give you some examples really of what this kind of looks like, because the other thing to say, another bit of feedback that we had from our recent inspection was there are many good bits that were kind of highlighted around our virtual school practice and the impact that we're making in partnership with DTs and social workers and foster carers. However, there was that sentence which said personal education plans are not yet of consistently high standards. So we do have some variation, and the biggest place we find variation is in terms of the targets. So just hence we put this into the policy. So we've got some examples here when we look at the needs of academic progress, and probably those are the easier targets to write almost. Some of the other areas that I mentioned on just talking about the previous slide, they're much more difficult and challenging sometimes to write targets. So I've made a kind of an effort to provide some examples. So social emotional needs, what might a target look like? Adult relationship, peer relationships. We have a number of unaccompanied asylum seeking young people in Surrey. So an English language communication need for UASC, transition needs, and then the two areas that are shown in that kind of reddish colour, they're not needs as such, but they're kind of areas where DTs have given us the feedback. It's really difficult to write targets for a child, for example, who's a really able student and really excelling academically. Where might you focus more Pupil Premium Plus and focus the target? And equally well, a child with an EHCP who has numerous targets within their EHCP, how does that relate to PEP targets? So I've kind of chosen those as a couple of particular examples. Right, can I go to the next slide, please, George? Right, I'm going to run you through a few examples now. So this is a child where the need has been identified as academic progress in maths. So some gaps in her knowledge around multiplication. Meaning that she is using very long-winded methods to solve problems, and that's causing a kind of long time delay in terms of completing work and so forth. So the point about this one is that the example is a very distinct and specific area of the curriculum. So it could be anything, but it's just making the point that it's really kind of specific. And the intervention there is around one-to-one tutoring, and then there's a lot of guidance at the moment, as we know, around one-to-one tutoring and the value of that. It's all highlighted in the Education Endowment Fund guidance. but also the feedback from our young people, our care experienced young people, suggests that that they're very, very positive about one-to-one tuition and the fact that they are supporting confidence in curriculum subjects as well as catching up, but all kinds of other benefits as well in terms of modelling or co-regulating and modelling kind of regulated behaviour and so forth. So there's all kinds of added benefits to one-to-one tuition in addition to the, you know, what clearly is an academic benefit, and they're the specific impact that the child has that intervention has made. So I suppose the point being there is very, very specific, and we're moving away from more generalised targets. Can you go to the next slide, please, George? So emotional needs. So here we've got a child called Ryan, and this was particularly written when the pandemic was more in full force, really. So this child felt very fearful about the virus, the fact that family members could fall ill, and that was triggering other memories and anxieties. So a kind of separation anxiety from being away from his foster carer at that point, and an elevated Sdq score, you know, just as Michelle has been outlining. So really, the example of the target here was around being able to express those thoughts, emotions, and anxieties and manage them better through art, because he was a child that enjoys that very much. And the intervention is really around art therapy there, and you can see the impact. Ryan loves to draw and paint. This has really helped him to explore his emotions and develop self-awareness of how he's feeling. And his drawings have also acted as transitional objects between home and school, reducing his anxieties. So that should say Ryan, not Luke. There was and then the elevated score being checked later on, because what happens with those scores is they're recorded once a year, so you can see a potential kind of reduction in that score. Thank you. Okay, could you go on to the next slide, please? One there around adult relationships and the support of an ELSA. I know ELSAs are used heavily in Surrey schools, and they provide some fantastic support, and it's really looking at how the ELSA in this school was providing very specific support around this child's needs, and supporting with frequent transitions from kind of one adult to another in the school environment. Okay, can you go on to the next one, please? Peer relationships. So a child who found it very difficult to kind of adapt to his peer group, particularly following the lockdown and the change or one of the lockdowns, and the change from small group of children being with small groups to kind of larger groups. So for him, the example of the target was using a target based on use of an alternative provision, actually, and on a farm, and that was continuing for this particular young person to support positive relationships with peers in a really informal setting. So the kind of impact that saw in terms of putting that into place, being in the outdoors, has helped Alex to incorporate walking the farm, talking to staff and other young people, listening to nature and farm noises, and that's helped him develop adaptive coping strategies which have improved his relaxation and stabilised his emotions. And then that's been kind of linked with going back in the school setting to feedback with a trusted adult, a key adult in the school. So the feedback sessions with that key adult included use of social stories to help Alex to make sense of specific situations and suggest appropriate social response where needed. So that was an example of how that worked. Can you go to the next one, please? So was the one about the unaccompanied asylum-seeking child and looking at a specific area in terms of language skills, English language skills, with the use of a tutor focusing on that area. Can you go on to the next one, please? And then transition. And this is a child new to care. So thinking back about the slide with the variety of other targets, that there may be non-academic areas causing a challenge to learning. So the needs there, Connor, new to care, having been a young carer for his younger siblings due to his parents' problems with drug and alcohol misuse. He's finding it difficult to adjust to a new routine in a new home, as well as at school. Transitions can be stressful and exhausting. So that really was looking at the support from the ELSA. So looking together with Connor at ways to manage those transitions during the school day, and checking in and talking through them, and the pupil premium being requested was asked to fund additional ELSA supervision via the EP service, because that's quite an intensive type of support. And then you see some of the impact there. Okay, can I have the next slide, please, George? Right, academically able student. I think this is one of those areas where the feedback we have is sometimes it's difficult to think how you would use a pupil premium plus to add for that additionality for a student like Melissa. So this is a girl who's making an able student making expected progress in all her subjects, on track to achieve the expected standard in all subjects, quiet but not that confident in social situations, but creative and enjoying art and photography. So what she did was some kind of timetable sessions with a key adult and a trusted adult within the performing arts department, and planning and producing photography and publicity for the school end of term production of Joseph. So what the pupil premium funded her to do was to some of the equipment actually around that kind of area, to kind of enhance quality of photography and fund an online photography course. And then she went on to consider this as one of her college choices, and you can see the kind of impact that made, the confidence really that gave her, even kind of directing staff and student peers where to stand so she could take she could do that photography well, broadening her network, extracurricular interests, something additional for her personal statement for college, and a creative outlet as well. So it's just one example how when you've got a child who appears to be really thriving academically, what are the other areas that you might consider, and you might consider appropriate pupil premium spend. Okay, can we have the next slide, please, George? And then I think the final one there is a child with an EHCP, and it's looking at how, what's the kind of relationship between the EHCP and the PEP. So it's looking at what's not on the EHCP. There's still a need that is not covered or funded elsewhere. So this is a child with SEMH needs. And as a looked after child, emotional health and well-being are his greatest needs, and really those are relating to the circumstances which brought him into care and the huge changes. So that is really an area where pupil premium was used to fund a music therapist to work with Tom, because he loved music and that was a really safe, calming kind of experience for him. And it wasn't something that was on the EHCP, but nevertheless was a need. So the music therapy was an example of where, one need was not being met by EHCP, but was able to be supplemented on the PEP, and so really supported him. Right, so we'll go on from that one. So can you put the next? Right, okay. So I've kind of given quite a number of examples there in quick succession. So I wonder if there's any kind of comments or thoughts anybody would like to make. You can obviously read those in a bit more detail and get some kind of further thoughts around that. I do have one comment here. It can be helpful to think about providing and developing cultural capital for academically able students as well. Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things actually that comes out of some of the very little research into Pupil Premium Plus for looked after children, is that's a bit of an area that's sometimes neglected. And I suppose it's because all of the other areas are so pressing that it's not the first thing that's thought about. But yeah, that's really, really important. Thank you for that comment. Are there any other questions or comments anybody would like to make? Okay, we will continue. George, if you can get to the next slide, please. So getting the most out of Pupil Premium Plus. This is taken from the DFE statutory guidance, and it's an example of, and it's put into the guidance deliberately, so it's an example from a virtual school which has identified kind of optimum use of Pupil Premium Plus, and they really, the things mentioned there are really, they tie into what we've been talking about already. Individually tailored to the needs and strength of each child, and that talks to the kind of needs analysis that we were mentioning before. Focus on short-term goals, opportunities for children to experience success, given feedback, all the things that we would kind of expect to see really, and with an emphasis on relationship building with appropriate adults and peers. So there's nothing that's surprising from that list. It kind of summarises, you know, all the things we've been saying already, really. Can you put the next slide up, please, George? Right, so I mentioned the survey that we did a while back around use of Pupil Premium, and it was really interesting to see some of the impacts that DTs had shared, and some lovely examples really. What we were saying before about the, you know, the tutoring, high quality individual tuition, clearly an academic impact. So an example there, a child making accelerated progress, reaching expected levels in both English and maths. But also importantly, tutoring supported the child's self-esteem, self-confidence, allowed them to participate more in lessons, and they had greater understanding of the content. So all the kind of multiple impacts of one-to-one tuition. A comment then from a care leaver, sorry, not a care leaver, a looked after child, a slightly older looked after child. Being independent means a lot to me. I like to not have to rely on people for things and be able to do things on my own. With the independence, I've been able to excel in my education and overcome more than I could ever imagine. I think everyone deserves to learn independent skills, as it helps you grow and give you a taste of reality as life is. So just echoing what we were saying about the importance of independent skills. So I think that's another key area that we would want to think about. And then a lovely example from the other kind of end of the age spectrum, from a school and nursery, using mini rucksacks containing speaking and listening, reading, fine and gross motor skills activities. And those activities, those objects, also acted as transitional items between school and home to support emotional well-being. So that was a really lovely and creative example of how Pupil Premium was used. ELSA support there, as we've mentioned, particularly when children are experiencing multiple changes, for example, a placement change, school frequently being the point of stability when children are dealing with you know, many things going on in their lives. play therapy there to process events, feelings and triggers, emotional resilience, and then I think the bottom one there, it was also the increased participation in lessons, a child feeling more confident with the support of a tutor, and pre-learning, pre kind of discussing content of lessons, so using the tutoring in that way to increase engagement in the classroom and feeling more confident there. And that really being noticed. So some lovely impacts there that we've seen from DTs, which we're very grateful for, because they're lovely examples. Go to the next slide, please, George. Right, so finally, just wanted to kind of end on this, but this really kind of leads to the section of our pupil premium policy, which is around the frequently asked questions, and they're the questions we get asked very often. So they are kind of the most popular ones, including the slightly controversial ones are included. So effective use of pupil premium. So you might want to have a look and think about this, but these are some of the examples where you're thinking, is this a good use or isn't it a good use? Some of them clearly are examples of where we would expect pupil premium to be funded from elsewhere, and those might include paying for school uniform, which we would see as something within the foster carer's allowance. Other things like that would be transport to school, and things like that. Funding a breakfast club, that could be, this is why I was talking before about we would try to take a flexible approach to every request coming in through a child's PEP, but we need to see if a breakfast club was being requested, is it to support a child's identified social and emotional needs and peer support, or is it childcare? If it was childcare, that probably wouldn't be an example of a good use, but if it was supporting their and their personal development and learning, then that might be, but that would have to be made clear on the PEP. Another area which causes lots of questions is the use of technology, funding a laptop. So it's, can we use Pupil Premium Plus to fund a laptop? And it's a bit of a qualified yes. So there's some kind of clear guidance in the frequently asked questions. We've had a number of schemes where through the pandemic, but also through other activities in the virtual school, where we have provided laptops or made laptops available for children's learning, particularly when they were engaged in remote learning. And there'll be other examples where schools have done this as well. So we do have, you know, has that child already had that? Is this the best use of Pupil Premium? Does it link with the child's identified needs? Those are the kind of questions to ask. So it's a bit of a qualified yes. So it's something to think about. Is it the best use? Right. There's other things around trips, school trips, which sometimes come up. So the example there, full funding for a history trip to see a World War I battle site in France, organised by the school. It's part of the curriculum. You do want that child to have access to that and to not miss out, and all of the other benefits such as the kind of peer support, etc. However, that's quite a substantial trip for a foster carer to pay for alone. Small trips we might think, well, that could come out of the fostering allowance. So that one you'd be thinking a contribution maybe might be appropriate. So it's a more of a nuanced kind of request. Elsa we've talked about, and we've seen some examples. One-to-one tutors we've talked about. Assessments, we do get requests for assessments, and sometimes it's difficult to see, should that be a health funded activity? We would normally go and seek the advice of our AP colleagues around that, but it wouldn't be a kind of blanket no. It would be a right, what are the child's identified needs? Do the child have an EHCP? All of those kind of the questions that would need to be asked first. Right, okay, thank you. Can you go to the next slide, please, George? Because I know that we're right on the last little bit, we are. So, of course, if you have a desire to read more extensively about Pupil Premium Plus, there's, of course, plenty of material for you. There's all the conditions of grant. There's an overview from there's DFE guidance. They're not long pieces of guidance, but they're there. I've referenced the recovery premium and the schools-led tutoring grant, which has specific areas of guidance. They're in our policy as well. The DFE guidance for local authorities and DTs around the education of looked after children, where you'll find references to Pupil Premium Plus. And there are some also pieces of research there which are useful to have a look into. And just what we were saying before about cultural capital, actually, there's an article there around that. So there's some kind of interesting areas to have a look at, particularly if you're kind of thinking more about how you optimise use of Pupil Premium Plus. Right, I think that pretty much wraps up our session for this afternoon. It's been, I know, a bit of a breakneck pace romp through Pupil Premium Plus and an update to the guidance and our current policy. But we will send you all of this after the session, and I hope that that's just given you the refresh and the updates that you were needing.